Hi friends, I'm Holly Lolly. Often in the comments under the videos, I see phrases from different people claiming that I lie in my videos, that I make things up, or that what I describe can't happen, or happens differently in Japan. Today, let me explain where my stories come from and why people might get mixed impressions. To understand how a person in emigration without language skills feels, I really ask you to imagine that you are thrown into an unfamiliar city where people are a little bit different from you, and it's as if you are wearing earplugs and can't hear anything. What do I mean when I say hear nothing? As it happens, I still don't know the language. I've been learning it for 2.5 years on a book level, and I communicate very well with my tutor, but with Japanese people, my communication doesn't go very far at all. That's why my family and I feel in Japan like people with closed ears. You seem to hear everything, but you don't understand anything at all. Even elementary tasks that you don't even think about in your everyday life become a real problem for me. I'm not complaining by any means, I'm just telling you what happens when a person goes abroad to live without knowing the language. I'm sharing my experience with you and telling you how it goes so that you don't repeat my mistakes. Alternatively, if you are ready for something like this, you'll know what to expect. For example, you decide to go to a restaurant or cafe in the evening. To do this, you need to book a table. I took a course, I know how to book a table. I say in simple words that I need a table, but then they start answering me in a way that's very different from what the book taught, and I don't understand anything at all. In the book, of course, it says they will ask how many people, for example, but in reality, they start communicating with some incomprehensible phrases. As a result, I understand nothing, apologize, and hang up. Or going to a hospital, you can't just go there. First, you have to make an appointment in advance. Second, you have to find an interpreter who can go with you, so you have to match the time of your appointment with when the interpreter is available. Solving absolutely trivial and simple tasks that you don't even think about in everyday life becomes a real quest abroad without knowing the language. If in countries where I understand the language I can solve 10 things in a day, in Japan it takes me almost half a year. Let me tell you how I communicate with the Japanese. I am a very sociable person. I can talk to people calmly, but not in Japan. If other people move, for example, a girl marries a Japanese man, she has no choice but to learn the language to communicate with her partner, and her whole environment will be built around Japanese communication. In my family, we don't speak Japanese because we don't need it. And on the streets, I can't pester people to talk to them. So the way I perceive information is purely subjective. I can observe and analyze things as I see them, but since I don't understand the language, I may interpret something incorrectly. My Japanese teacher keeps telling me that I need practice, that I need to practice the language with Japanese people, but I just don't understand where I can find this practice. We started thinking about where I could even go to have contact with Japanese people, but I work very hard, and the only interaction I have is taking my kids to school and daycare. At school, I can't practice much. I also have a gym under my house, and I go there every evening with my sister for at least half an hour. But it's so quiet there, everyone is wearing headphones, and no one talks to anyone. My teacher advised me to try to talk to the trainer. Even if I already know the answer to my question, at least I could formulate my thoughts, and he might respond. Here's the backstory. Our gym had one trainer 90% of the time. As I said, we go to the gym a lot, and we always saw him there. Whenever we came to the gym, he was always there. We know that most Japanese people tend to have one job for life. It's not customary to change jobs. In our countries, if someone gets bored or burned out, they quit and find another job. This isn't the case in Japan, where salaries often depend on how many years someone has worked. This trainer even recognized us on the street and greeted us. It's hard not to notice us in Japan. For 2 years, while we went to the gym, he worked there consistently. Then one day, I decided to practice my Japanese. I learned a phrase beforehand to say that I had some back problems, but I wanted to strengthen it and asked which machines I could work out on. I approached the trainer, said hello, apologized for bothering him, and asked my question. I want to clarify that I checked the phrase with my interpreter, and she confirmed that it was correct, but he seemed nervous when I approached him as a foreigner. His hands started shaking, and he became very nervous. He did answer me, but I didn't understand anything. I thanked him, but he didn't say much else. He kept apologizing, and I apologized for making him uncomfortable too. After that, he left his counter and closed the door. I know they don't usually close those doors. For the rest of my class, he ignored me and tried to avoid me. Usually, he stood at his workplace, greeting everyone and talking to them, but this time he was just hiding from me. I felt guilty and didn't understand what I did wrong. I just asked the trainer about his work. I didn't think it would cause such a reaction. I didn't want to make him so worried about talking to me. If I had known, I wouldn't have approached him. For about a week, every time he saw me, he grabbed a mop and started scrubbing the floors in the hallways. I realized he didn't want me to ask him anything else. A week later, the man quit. How did I realize that? Because for the 6 months I continued going to the gym, he never showed up again. I really hope it wasn't because of me, but if I did make him that uncomfortable, honestly, I feel scared and ashamed, and I don't even know how to try talking to someone else after that. I had another story when I tried to communicate with Japanese people without any bad intentions. We met someone who spoke English, and we thought he was a friend of our family. We invited him to our house, and he came over. We chatted in English. It was such a blessing to learn at least something about the Japanese, what to ask them, how dialogue works. I don't want to go into details because it's a personal story, but here's the situation. Imagine your friend is a doctor, and tomorrow you plan to go to the hospital where he works. In Japan, responsibilities are very divided. When my son and I were in the hospital, we saw that one person took temperatures, another took blood pressure, and so on. Everything was done separately. My friend asked me about my plans for tomorrow, and I mentioned going to the hospital to check some details at the reception. I always arrange for an interpreter in such situations, but my friend said I didn't need to go anywhere. He would solve my issue. I hadn't even asked him to do anything. He took the initiative to help. However, that was the last time we spoke. After that, he disappeared for about a week, and he never wrote or called us again. I decided not to clarify anything, but I needed to solve my issue, so I decided to go to the hospital myself and resolve it. Then I got a message from him where he said he couldn't solve my issue. He sent a lot of messages apologizing and saying how bad he felt about it. Before that, we had invited him to our family party, but he also wrote that he couldn't come. I didn't want to stop communicating with him because of this issue. I told him everything was fine, nothing had happened, and I would solve the issue myself, and that we still wanted to see him. But he refused and said he had a lot of work to do. Since then, we tried to call him a few more times, but he always said he had no time. We haven't seen each other since. I asked my acquaintance what I did wrong and why the Japanese guy refuses to talk to me. She told me that I had embarrassed him because he had made it his mission to solve my issue but failed. My mistake was that I had asked him the question, and I shouldn't have. Because of their collectivism, he would have had to discuss the matter with others, as one person rarely decides anything alone in a Japanese company. So, by asking him, I embarrassed him when he couldn't solve the issue, and he decided it was better not to communicate with us anymore. These are two real stories from my life about what my communication with Japanese people has led to and how I unintentionally caused discomfort in their lives. To be honest, I don't feel very good about myself after these two stories. Now, every time I think about trying to communicate with Japanese people, I hesitate. It's very important for me to communicate sincerely with my friends and convey my emotions and feelings, but I know that the Japanese don't do that. I absolutely respect their choices and mentality, but for me, it's a little incomprehensible that someone will never say what they really think. Japanese responses will always be positive, everything will seem fine, and you'll never know what's truly on their mind. Let's get back to our main topic of conversation. I read the comments, and people write that I'm lying because I said that you can call an ambulance in Japan only when you are in a near-death state. Where did I get that information from? Let me explain. After about 2 months of living in Japan, my kids got very sick. They had a very high fever and a cough. Of course, I had brought my own medications. I always bring a whole medicine cabinet, and I started trying to bring the fever down. I gave one syrup, but it didn't help. The temperature was still close to 40 degrees Celsius. I gave a second syrup an hour later, but it didn't help either. In such situations in our countries, you call an ambulance, and they give the child a shot to lower the fever. My kids had a temperature of 40 degrees Celsius and were practically in a semi-fainting state. I began to panic. These are my children, and I didn't know what to do. You can't call a pediatrician to your home here, so I called our interpreter and asked her to call an ambulance for us. She immediately asked what was wrong and whether anyone was dying. I told her I couldn't bring down my kid's high fever, and it turns out that's not a reason in Japan to call an ambulance. I didn't know what I was supposed to do at all. The temperature was 40 degrees Celsius and rising, and I couldn't give any more medicine. The interpreter told me to take the children, go to the emergency room at the nearest small hospital, wait in line, and then see a doctor. If you have children, you'll understand me. It was spring at the time, but it was rainy, unpleasant, and damp. The nearest hospital was a 15-minute walk away. and my kids weren't able to get there at all. I didn't believe the interpreter, so I called several others, but almost all of them told me the same thing: an ambulance couldn't be called. One even told me about the fine for calling an ambulance if the person isn't dying. You can call an ambulance if someone has a heart attack, epilepsy, or is unconscious, but a high fever that you can't bring down isn't a valid reason, and you could face a large fine. Naturally, all the information I tell you isn't just from my head. Since I can't communicate freely with Japanese people, much of my knowledge comes from interpreters or online sources. The internet helps me find interesting facts, but the life stories I share are true and based on my experiences. I often ask for advice in Facebook groups when I face situations I don't know how to handle. People there share their stories, and if I use one, I always ask for permission. Still, 95% of the stories I tell are personal, and the remaining 5% are stories from acquaintances, which I always make clear. When I ran to the emergency room with my 2 children, they didn't want to admit us. They said, "What if they have COVID?" 2 staff members came out in suits and special medical masks to avoid infection. They tested my kids, confirmed it wasn't COVID, and then examined them. They told me not to worry, prescribed some medicine, and directed me to a pharmacy to buy it. Another story happened to a personal acquaintance of mine. She said that during a summer heat wave of 40 degrees Celsius, she went to the emergency room with her children because of food poisoning. It was a small hospital, and there were so many people there that the line extended outside. The heat was unbearable. In front of her was a man with a high temperature, practically fainting. The medical staff brought out a gurney for him to lie on, held an umbrella over him to protect him from the sun, and placed a compress on him. But even so, he waited for about an hour and a half in the heat before being admitted. So, based on these stories, judge for yourself whether you can call an ambulance in Japan or not. I formed my opinion from my own experience and stories shared by acquaintances. I hope you found this information useful and learned something new. If you have any thoughts or comments on the stories I've shared, please let me know, because I still don't fully understand why some Japanese people stopped communicating with me. Write your thoughts and tell me what you think. Please give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and see you in new videos. Bye!